won the World Championship. This deck has 2 Tarmogoyfs, I'm sorry, 2 Tombstalkers in addition to 4 Tarmogoyfs, and now Deathrite Shamans and Delver of Secrets.
Yeah. This is very close to the Bug Delver list that took down Orlando a few weeks ago.
And Jeremy Sue looks like he won the die roll, and he's going to lead things off with a Delver of Secrets off of a fetch land and an Underground Sea. There is the Delver of Secrets. He has the checklist card in his deck. And he's going to see pretty much immediately that he's up against a little something wonky, because Gemstone Mine and Faithless Looting are happening on turn 1. That's going to get countered by a Daze, however.
Yeah, pretty much anything that allows Dredge to get a card in the graveyard, you need to counter, because you lose an opportunity to do that. You know, once the Dredge engine is actually up and running, there's not a lot to be done.
Yep. And Jeremy does not flip his Delver of Secrets on turn 1. His hand consists of Abrupt Decay, a pair of Tarmogoyfs, a Wasteland, a Underground Sea, and another Daze. He's going to use the Wasteland to take out Mike's Mana Source.
And this looks like a very good opening for Jeremy, but without a way to interact with the graveyard, he's really at the mercy, at least in game 1, of Mike finding a way to put a Dredger into the graveyard.
Yep, because he does have the Lion's Eye Diamond in his hand, and so now he's got Lion's Eye Diamond in hand with Faithless Looting in the graveyard. He's got 2 of them, and he's got another one in his hand, so he's going to actually get to be able to draw and discard 4.
And we see there appears to be no Dredger in Mike's graveyard right now, although he has a Bridge from Below and a Nicarid.
Yep, so he's going to draw 2 and discard 2. And the first Faithless Looting is going to get exiled, so he's going to wait till he finds another Dredger to crack that second Lion's Eye Diamond, it looks like. Or he would like to, except for that Jeremy is probably going to be able to Abrupt Decay that at some point in the near future.
He can also potentially daze the flashback on the Faithless Looting as well, so none of this matters if Mike is actually able to find a Dredger, then he can get the ball rolling. But otherwise, if he goes forward here...
Yep, and he does find a Dredger. And he's going to counter the Faithless Looting, it looked like?
Yeah, that's a quick concession, as Mike with no permanence in play, no ability to... The Stinkweed Ape that he flipped over, no ability to discard that again into the future. It might have been a kind of a fast concession, as maybe he has another draw step to find something else, but Jeremy quickly up again, game against one of Magic's more comical decks.
Sure. You had some interesting opinions on decks like Dredge, decks that sort of play outside of the rules to Magic without really playing lands and spells in the traditional sense.
Oh yeah, the analogy that I like to make is, imagine you're playing in a rec basketball league and you play against a team that's just drop kicking the ball to one another.
Sure.
It's like, I don't know if that's even legal in the rules. Let's, for argument's sake, let's say that it is. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's okay, but there might be some other sport closer to the one that you're looking to play.
Yeah, presumably at the rec center, there's a kickball league.
Right, you could find the kickball league. You know, I don't quite understand the mentality exactly of, you know what, I really like Magic. I just am not a big fan of lands and spells. I want to remove those from my deck and work on flipping my deck over to my graveyard and operating off of the text of graveyard cards. But
well, it's not like Dredge is the only deck that operates outside of the rules of Magic. You have one land Belcher and no land Belcher and things like Cheerios.
Oh, there's certainly
spells. There's a lot of decks that really play outside of those conventional rules.
Yeah, certainly Dredge is not alone in this regard, but to me it feels like the most extreme of all of them. We're going to go and look at the sideboard here. I'm basically looking for anti-graveyard cards in Jeremy's list. This is the most critical thing. He has a Grafdigger's Cage. He has some Spell Piercers he can potentially bring in. Not good all the time, and certainly on the draw, it's going to struggle to be impactful, but you know, he can catch potentially Faithless Looting flashbacks or Faithless Looting the first time, or Careful Study. Often the Dredge deck is only operating on one land, and that really does it for meaningful cards. I mean, there's just not a lot going on here. Again, Jeremy does have Force of Will. He does have Deathrite Shaman. This is not a bad base to have a reasonable game plan against Dredge.
Now, Grafdigger's Cage works against some things that you might not think about, but also doesn't work against some things that you might think about. It does not work against Bridge from Below triggers, but it does work against Narcomoeba.
Yes.
Because it goes directly into the graveyard and creatures can't enter the battlefield from the graveyard. But it's not a traditional graveyard hate spell like Rest in Peace.
Right, and if they're on some sort of dread return plan for a large creature, it can also be productive there.
Looking over at Michael Somerville's sideboard, he has an Iona, Shield of Emeria, an Elishnorn, and an Ashen Rider as additional Dread Return targets if he wants to use that plan with the additional Dread Return. He also has 4 Firestorm, 4 Nature's Claim, 2 Ashen Ghoul, and an Undiscovered Paradise as an additional mana source. I would anticipate he brings in the Nature's Claims against Bug Delver. However, I'm not certain because he doesn't have white mana in his deck to be able to fight against Rest in Peace.
Yeah, it's you know, I expect him to actually keep the core of his deck pretty much the same. I am not a huge fan of bringing in the reanimation package against decks that have Deathrite Shaman. It's possible he wants Firestorm in his deck in the post-board games. That gives him a pretty good tool of fighting Deathrite Shaman and Delver openings and giving him another way to discard cards. So
it's pretty interesting, actually, looking at Michael's deck. Typically, you see a one of Flamekin Zealot or a one of Gristlebrand or something like that in the main deck. None of that for Michael. He's got Golgari Grave Trolls, and that's all he's targeting with his Dread Return. This deck sort of behaves a little bit like a mid-range deck, and it just tries to make you discard all your cards, then puts in a bunch of zombies and a Grave Troll. Acts a little bit like Nick Fit in that way, actually.
Yeah, it's you know, there's a lot of debate amongst Dredge players about whether or not you're supposed to have really a dedicated reanimation package in your first game, or if you're just supposed to keep the deck streamlined and bring that stuff in for post-board games. The consensus, my understanding, is that, you know, most of the people that I talk to, they're big fans of just having Icarids and grinding out the game that way. Some of the post-board games, you want specific bullets to interact with, troubling permanents your opponent might have. Elishnorn is a great tool to have against Elves, for example, and a couple other matchups like that. Iona can be a free win against a class of decks, but game 1, you just want the deck to be as streamlined as possible.
And so we are going to move to game 2, and Michael will be on the play, looking at his hand. He's decided to keep. Jeremy doesn't look particularly pleased with his opener, but he is going to keep as well, as we see. Mike Somerville leads off with Putrid Imp, and that is going to be met by Force of Will, discarding or removing Force of Will.
And it almost doesn't matter what Mike casts on the first turn there. All that Jeremy is concerned with is preventing him from getting a discard card in the graveyard for as long as possible.
And Mike's land is also taken care of, and now can't play a spell on turn 2, and so he just has to pass, and now Jeremy is able to proceed with his game plan.
Now, given enough time, Mike can actually reach a spot where he can eventually just discard a Dredger and get the ball rolling that way. But if Jeremy has any sort of pressure, that might be too slow.
So Jeremy searches his library for an Underground Sea and is going to play a Delver of Secrets. Second verse, same with the first, very similar to the last game, although this time on turn 2 rather than turn 1. Mike has 13 lands in his main deck. He has 4 Cephalid Coliseum, 4 City of Brass, 4 Gemstone Mine, and an Undiscovered Paradise, in addition to the other Undiscovered Paradise in his sideboard to be able to try to cast spells. The Gemstone Mine is now in the graveyard, so he only has 13 left in his deck to be able to try and find a way to cast the Careful Study that he has.
Yeah. This Dredge deck's a real crackerjack.
And so we have Deathrite Shaman as well. Delver of Secrets has not flipped just yet. And Jeremy doesn't look like he's going to trigger it there, and instead is going to shuffle away, finding another land to put into play. Didn't really want whatever he found on top of his deck.
Now, an interesting element to Michael's Dredge deck is no copies of Street Wraith. Some Dredge players have been moving to this card to give them, cantripping is nice for the deck in general. It leads to more explosive openings if you have a repetitive way to discard. And second, and more importantly, it gives you some amount of game against Deathrite Shaman in response to a Deathrite Shaman activation on your Dredger that goes to the graveyard. You can cycle Street Wraith and dredge the card back to your hand. So a lot of players have begun incorporating it to, in essence, to fight against Deathrite Shaman, but none to be found in Mike's list.
It's also another card that can be removed to Icarid to bring it back
Yes.
on an upkeep. It does pretty much everything you'd want the deck to do. It's a Gitaxian Probe that doesn't see your opponent's hand. It just draws a card for 2 life, which is sometimes exactly what the Dredge deck wants, as we see Jeremy proceeds with his turn, deciding how he wants to proceed after he resolves this Ponder, decides to keep all the cards there on top and takes Daze. And in comes the 1/1 yet again. Mike is going to be able to draw an 8th card here, and even if he doesn't find a land, he is just going to be able to discard at the end of the turn if he finds a Dredger, which he has. He has a City of Brass, though, on top, and he's going to use it to play Putrid Imp. That is going to be met by Daze.
This is another defining feature of games involving Dredge. The games are rarely close on the board. Someone is, generally speaking, getting humiliated.
Yeah, this isn't exactly the poster child game for, or poster child match for Dredge. He's having a little bit of a difficult time against Jeremy Sue's Bug Delver deck. Bug Delver is able to poke holes in all sorts of strategies, this one being one of them because of cards like Deathrite Shaman and Daze.
Right, if Mike actually is able to land his imp on the opener and Jeremy, doesn't have Force of Will and doesn't have a kill spell for it, this game is
absolutely
likely a total landslide victory for Mike.
And so Jeremy uses Deathrite Shaman on the end step to start pecking away at Mike's life total. Hiding it under his graveyard there, and he is going to get to untap, see if we can trigger the Delver of Secrets here. He does not, and it is a Tarmogoyf. That will speed up the clock.
And the Wasteland here is also very good for Jeremy.
And in comes the 1/1 Delver of Secrets yet again.
As by Mike making the mistake of playing a land and casting a spell is now further and further away from getting a Dredger into the graveyard.
Yeah, he could have just moved to his discard phase, I suppose.
Well, the problem is the Deathrite Shaman in play gets it out of the graveyard. If Mike had a Street Wraith in his hand, for example, then he would be able to engineer it, but instead he can't, and now will struggle to battle through this Deathrite Shaman and this Delver of Secrets.
Yeah, he's going to have a tough go of it here. If he did bring in the Firestorms, though, those are going to be pretty good, as Jeremy is fresh out of counter spells. He's going to have to step on the gas, though, as this Tarmogoyf's coming into play, and Mike is already at 11, so he's only got so many turns to be able to get there.
Yeah, we're looking at a potential kill next turn if Jeremy is able to find a spell to flip that Delver.
That is a 3/4 Tarmogoyf currently. And Mike has decided to look at his hand now, deciding how he wants to proceed. Accidentally dropped a card on the floor there.
I assume it is a Golgari
Ooh, no, it's not. It is a Undiscovered Paradise. So he's going to get to use that to cast whatever he chooses in his hand, see if he can get something from there. He's going to cast Cabal Therapy, naming presumably Force of Will?
Not clear.
Certainly did not name Golgari Charm, which Jeremy did indeed name, or have in his hand. He named Hymn to Torok.
Hymn to Torok is a card I think Jeremy is unlikely to even cast were in his deck post-board at this stage.
Yep.
As the only way for something really bad to happen from this position is for Jeremy to force Mike to discard 2 Dredgers to allow him to go over the top of the Deathrite Shaman.
And so Deathrite Shaman is going to remove that Cabal Therapy. And Mike falls to 9 life. Jeremy untaps with both Tarmogoyf and Delver. And now Delver's an Insectile Aberration. That's 6 power that is going to be attacking. There is Ponder. Finding Spell Pierce, Daze, Land. 2 counterspells probably going to be enough here to salt away this game.
Well, the Glyph is going up to 4 here, right, because of this Ponder? As now there's an instant land creature sorcery. So this is an attack for 7 and a Deathrite Shaman activation. Yeah, they're confirming that it's actually 4.
Yep. As the Ponder becomes the sorcery that was necessary in the graveyard, that puts Mike to 2 exactly for the Deathrite Shaman activation, and Mike falls to 0 life, and he extends the hand. So Jeremy Sue's Bug Delver deck manages to shut down the Dredge deck.
I'm willing to suspect Jeremy's easiest 2 games,